Are snakes actually aggressive? And what is the difference between an aggressive snake and a defensive snake? Today, let's go over it and talk about the top 5 most defensive pythons. My name's Adam, you're watching Wickens Reptiles, stick around. So to spoil this right off the bat, there is no such thing as an aggressive snake. We're talking about defensive snakes, and let's talk about pythons. And I'll go more into detail about the difference between aggression and defensiveness, but let's just start off with number 5, MacLat pythons. I don't ever talk about MacLat pythons, but I should. I think they get a really bad rap for being aggressive, which the real term would be defensive, because they're trying to defend themselves. They're just kind of one of those more shy, recluse type of species, but that doesn't mean that they can't be great pets. Now, I am saying they can be really good pets, but that's not for everybody. This is kind of a larger species, between 6 and 8. Some people say up to 10 feet long, so not huge by any means. A lot of people are now saying that they're semi-arboreal. They will exhibit climbing behavior. I think that they're probably an intermediate species, but neither here nor there. They are not an evil species. None of these species are. They're just defensive. I think as a whole, this species is really underrated and misunderstood. So misunderstood that although they are technically semi-arboreal, or any keeper who keeps them would probably describe them that way, most people in a care guide, and definitely in decades past, haven't really seen them as a semi-arboreal snake. So not even knowing their full type of activity and their full type of behavior, how could you know if they're super aggressive or not? Which they're not, spoiler alert. But I think that's why they're so great after all. They're very active. This is a very active species. They're gonna be cruising around all the time. They have a very cool coloration. Some people would call it drab. I'm not in that camp. I think it's very cool how they have kind of the belly, how it transitions to the other part of the snake, their dorsal and their back. That's the same thing. Their sides and their back. I just think that the transition of the color is really cool. And more importantly, behavior. That's what this whole list is all about. They can be tamed very easily. I want to say thanks to All Canadian Reptile Girl, great channel on YouTube, fellow Canadian, and for sending the video of this MacLat python. This is not a super experienced keeper, obviously knows what she's doing, but I mean, this isn't someone with 30 years of taming python experience. This is someone who just was confident, was patient, and just did the work. And a lot of these snakes, that's what it is. You just have to do the work and handle these snakes as much as you can, and well, then you're gonna have a snake that you can handle. If you are gonna get this snake, I would just recommend that you look into it. They do have a very heavy feeding response, and that might be another reason why they get a bad reputation. Any snake that thinks everything is food, well, it's gonna bite sometimes, and you just have to make sure that they know that they're not in feeding mode before you pick one up. But you can feed them chicks and quails and rodents, and they're kind of varied, and that's what most people recommend. Very cool snakes. Number 4, green tree pythons. Now, I know you knew this was going to be on the list. This is a truly arboreal snake, an absolutely beautiful snake. Everybody knows this very cool type of green pattern, but did you know that these guys actually start off as red or yellow or some other shade? And that's just because they need to camouflage in a different area of the tree. Adults you're going to see near the canopy, where it's all lush and green, and juveniles you're going to see kind of closer to the forest floor and dark branches, sometimes flowers as well. So that's why they change color. Now you know. Now this snake gets a bad rap for being very bitey and aggressive, and again, not aggressive, defensive. They are an arboreal snake. There's stuff coming from above, stuff coming from below. These are not the top of the food chain where they're from, which is parts of Australia, Indonesia, and that area of the world, by the way. And I think with these guys, where they get their really bad rap is the fact that when they're babies, they are going to be super defensive. They're brightly colored, they're super small, it's very scary, you're a tiny little thing. That's the thing though, is a lot of the times people won't put in the work to tame down a baby, and if you don't tame down the baby, well, you're going to have to tame an adult, and that's a little bit more, I don't know, of a pain. Literally, because when you get bit by an adult, it sucks worse than getting bit by a baby. So if you put in the work and you tame them out, then you're not going to have a problem. A lot of people just don't want to deal with these kind of like pistols for babies that you're going to get with this species. So I think that's it. People don't tame them out when they're young. They get older, they're not tamed out. But you can definitely tame out green tree pythons. They can become handleable snakes. Pikachu's doing his best green tree python right now. Yellow tree python, this guy right here. Hello. I think if you're looking for an arboreal type of python, this might be one of the better ones because they're not too big. They're gonna get 4 or 5 feet. I mean, maybe 6 feet if you get a really big one. But all in all, it's a pretty manageable size for an animal. And even if you never wanted to handle it, these guys aren't so crazy that if you had it as a display animal, it would be cumbersome of you to have to feed it and to have to clean it. There are ways that you can make sure that it's not biting you every time you interact with it. Another really cool thing is they use gravity to eat, so that's pretty cool. Number 3, reticulated pythons. Now, reticulated pythons often get a bad rap as being very food aggressive and being very motivated to bite. And I'll tell you why. Well, I mean, last year it kind of blew up because everyone who didn't know anything about snakes knew what a reticulated python was because of this video right here.
Hi, you gonna come out?
Now, that's a whole thing of itself. She had rats in the room. She was offering her hand as food. Just a super inexperienced owner who didn't know what she was doing. If you're an experienced owner, which you should be if you get a reticulated python, by the way, these guys can be amazing. Reticulated pythons are maybe the smartest python that there is. Maybe the smartest snake, besides like king cobras, maybe, but like let's say top 5, top 10 smartest snakes. You can tell when you look at them and they look at you, it almost feels like there's something going on back there in their reptilian brain. This thing isn't solving math problems, but it is pretty smart in terms of snakes, as far as snakes go anyway. But this snake from Southeast Asia gets big. We're talking about over 20 feet long a lot of the time. Like, it's common. It's not like a berm where maybe a Burmese python might get 20 feet. These guys regularly get over 20 feet long. So it is something to consider. This is for expert level keepers, in my opinion. And what you might not know is these guys are actually arboreal or semi-arboreal as babies, and even into adulthood, you'll find them in trees in parts of Indonesia, for example, where you're gonna find them in their native population. As babies, you'll see them hanging out in the trees almost exclusively. So this is something that may be a little bit misunderstood, and that's why babies can be a little bit bitey, but I wouldn't say this is one of the more, defensively bitey type of snakes. It's just some people, they feel like they are a little bit more defensive than other type of giant snakes. And when I asked what should be on the list, a lot of people chimed in with retics. So I wanted to make sure that I kind of set them in a good light, a positive light. Personally, I prefer Burmese pythons when it comes to large snakes, but reticulated pythons, I mean, they're pretty freaking cool. Like, look how cool they look. And as far as defensiveness goes, oh, and by the way, let's just like squash the aggressive versus defensive thing. Snakes aren't aggressive. Aggression would mean they like chase you, they go out to harm you. Snakes don't want to hurt you.
We would never hurt you.
In fact, snakes probably don't know that they are hurting you. They just know this motion makes that thing that I perceive as a threat go away. All the want that is going on in their brain, and probably not even just their brain, but their muscles and their nerves as well, is just a reaction that causes a reaction that they know because of instinct. For example, this is gonna be terrible, if you cut the head off of a rattlesnake, which I don't recommend doing, it's a disgusting act, but we've all seen videos of, people in the south of the US doing this, the rattlesnake will still strike at you without a head. And my point being, a lot of the time, it's just a reflex that these snakes, when they feel defensive, when they feel like they're being threatened, they're just lunging out at you because they know instinctually that action, that physical action, causes a reaction of you, the threat, leaving. That is my long-winded way of saying, no, there's no such thing as an aggressive snake, but snakes can be defensive because they're trying to protect themselves, which, I mean, if snakes didn't have that need to protect themselves, then we wouldn't have snakes. They would have went extinct a long time ago. Okay, back to reticulated pythons. Huge, beautiful, tons of morphs. They're a little bit faster, so I recommend if you want a giant snake and you're ready for one, always be ready for one, I would suggest going with the Burmese python instead. But if you want something that's faster and is kind of like a workout to handle, reticulated pythons are really fun as well. So for a experienced keeper who has the right type of enclosure, which could be amazing, by the way, if you actually give them space to climb, which would be tough because you need a big space, reticulated pythons are amazing, but watch out for the feeding response, and otherwise you're a-okay. They're amazing. Number 2, carpet pythons. Now, you knew this was going to be on the list. These guys get a bad rap for being bitey and being flighty, and well, I mean, the flighty part for some might be true, but I think this kind of goes again on the same lines of the green tree python, which are basically from a very similar area, by the way, as carpet pythons. But carpet pythons, they aren't truly arboreal. They're semi-arboreal, so you'll find them on the ground more than you'd find a green tree python, which is just has nothing to do with them being defensive, just a cool thing to know. And there are different species and locales. So, for example, an Irian Jaya carpet python will get to like 4 or 5 feet, something like that. A coastal carpet python will get to sometimes 9 feet. So there is a big difference. The color, the pattern, it's just different depending on what one you choose. So in general, for carpet pythons, speaking in generalities, I think that they can tame down really easy, but same thing with the green tree pythons. They can be nippy as babies. People don't really want to deal with it, especially newer keepers. And if you don't deal with it when they are babies, it's going to be a heck of a lot harder and more trying, because bigger bites hurt more than smaller bites when they're an adult. So I think that's why they get the reputation, but they can be really great for handling. They are faster. They're not going to be as fat, for example, as some of the other snakes, right? So not as big around, but most arboreal or semi-arboreal snakes shouldn't be cylindrical anyway. So with that said, let's move on to something that is definitely not skinny. Blood pythons and short-tail pythons. You knew this was going to be on the list, and you knew it was going to be number 1. These guys have a terrible reputation for being defensive, for being aggressive, for wanting to bite you, very quick lightning strike, and very much a propensity to strike. These guys are the devil.
The devil.
Okay, maybe not. Maybe they're not the devil. No snakes are the devil. No snakes want to hurt you, and no snakes are aggressive. These guys just are a little bit more defensive than other species sometimes. But with that said, as we start to breed them in captivity and we start to get more and more generations of them, we can find like puppies, basically, in the shape of a fat sausage, which is what short-tail pythons and blood pythons are. They are short, fat sausages. Some of them can be like 15 pounds or more, but they're only going to get to 4 or 5 feet. They defies the laws of physics. They look ridiculous in their structure, but their coloration is beautiful. And that is why people sometimes try to get the best of both worlds, color of that with the personality of something a little bit more docile, and that's when you get super balls or blood balls, which sounds so uncomfortable. That's right, sometimes people will put Pikachu, who is peeing on me by the way, which is why I put him back, with a blood python, and you get a hybrid, which is basically the color sometimes of a blood python and the docileness, if that's a word, of a ball python. So with that said, you don't need to do that. You can actually get a really nice, very docile, gentle type of snake that is just a blood python if you work with it. But I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Same thing. Work with it when it's young, and if you do a good job and you give it the right conditions, you'll have a very nice snake when it's an adult to handle. Blood pythons are awesome. There should be more blood pythons around. Why are there not more blood pythons than short-tail pythons? So there you go. Yes, I kind of baited you in and used the word aggressive when I really didn't mean it. But I really hope that I kind of, at least if you didn't know before, kind of gave you an insight of what the difference between aggression and defensiveness is and why snakes are defensive sometimes, but definitely not aggressive. Let me know in the comment section below if you agree with this, if you didn't know this, if you learned anything, and let me know in the comment section what I should do next week. All of these ideas come from that comment section. And lately, they've been flying in from the Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much. You got to see this video early, several days early. You guys get discounts on the merch. You know about these really cool animals in my collection that I haven't told anybody about yet. For as little as $1 a month, you can be a Patreon supporter too. I'd really appreciate it. And I think we've talked enough for today. Plugged everything. Hit subscribe. See you on Thursday.